911. There was just a shot fired. A man was just shot. Okay. Is he breathing?
They weren't sure whether or not he was going to make it.
And I'm like, what happened? She said, he gone.
Surveillance video is one of the most important things because that does not lie.
We could tell that this was clearly a pursuit.
This wasn't an accidental shooting. This was actually a planned out murder execution.
Let's get past the I don't know stuff, okay? You want to tell us the truth?
Hey, Reggie.
Hey, what's up, man?
What's up?
Doing, bro?
Reggie was probably one of the most charismatic people that I think I've ever met. People just naturally were attracted to him. Reggie was working at his new job in the Quad City area.
Hey, so how's the job going?
It's going good, going good.
Yeah? How are the kids?
Reg has 2 children. He has a son and a daughter. He loved his children. Lil Reg was silly. He still didn't take too much of anything serious. The only thing that he took seriously was fatherhood. That's it. He was a serious father.
Oh, they're growing up so fast. Reggie, is that who I think it is?
His girlfriend, Kiara, had just recently moved to Cedar Rapids. And so he would just go out there to spend his time with her. And then he still had his own place in the Quad Cities. He just thought she was like real, like amazing. Like, and he was kind of like starstruck by her. Like he thought he hit the lotto when he met her.
Yo, I gotta go. I'll see you in a few days.
Reggie, always a pleasure, man.
I never thought that would be my last time to be in his presence or seeing him. We probably just thought it was just another day that we would go about our separate ways and we'll just see each other tomorrow.
Hi, I'm at Come and Go on First Avenue. There was just a shot fired. A man was just shot.
Okay, which Come and Go?
32nd Street and Come and Go. I think he got shot in the leg. They put him in a car. He's in a car.
What kind of a car? Plate number?
It's in a Monte Carlo.
Okay.
Is he breathing?
Okay, I'm going to start paramedics.
Uniform officers responded to the Come and Go. They determined quickly that the victim, Reginald Ward, was in bad shape.
Reggie is bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to his upper leg.
When officers first got there, Reginald Ward was still alive. And in fact, other bystanders who were there that morning had attempted to provide aid to him.
Reggie's girlfriend, Kiara Morris, is with him.
Officer Justin Kowinski is one of the first officers to arrive on scene. He gets his turbans, wraps it around the leg to apply pressure. They got paramedics that come on scene. The paramedics take over, and they're doing everything they can to try to stop this bleeding, but they can't.
EMS rush Reggie to the ER for treatment. An officer drives Kiara to the hospital to be with him.
By the time I got to Come and Go, the victim, Reginald Ward, had already been transported to St. Luke's Hospital. I was notified by officers at the scene that Reginald Ward had a lot of blood loss. It appeared where the shooting happened, there were multiple shell casings. The car that Reginald Ward was in was a black two-door Monte Carlo. It was near the exit, and that's where they had stopped and attended to Reggie. I went and spoke with the manager.
I'm Investigator DeVory. Tell us what happened.
She said she was cleaning the pumps when she saw the two vehicles come into the parking lot and stop at the pumps, and she knew right away something was going on by the way they pulled into the gas station. They were coming in at a higher rate of speed than normal, and once they were stopped, Reginald immediately exited his black Monte Carlo and was in an argument with the driver of the gold sedan. So she retreated to the store, and by the time she was getting to the store, people were starting to say there was a shooting.
I will need to see the surveillance.
Come and Go should have the best surveillance video because the crime happened there. And it happened in a location where you think that the cameras would have caught the shooting.
Start just before the incident.
But there are cameras on this date in question of when the shooting occurred. There's a camera obstructed, and then another one of its cameras weren't even working.
I can't see anything.
I was expecting to see the shooter, also see the vehicle that was involved. Being an investigator and getting video surveillance that you would think would show the crime at a business, and it doesn't, can be very frustrating.
Hey, I'll go speak to the girlfriend.
I went to St. Luke's Hospital to speak with a prime witness, Kiara Morrissey, and we were hoping that she would be able to tell us who did this.
Hi, Kiara. I'm investigator Jake, and I need to ask you a few questions about what happened this morning.
The doctor came in while I was trying to talk to you. Kiara, Reginald Ward was alive, but wasn't looking good.
He was in what's called PEA, pulseless electrical activity, when he came in, so he's not getting blood flow to his brain during that.
Just tell me, is he kind of dead?
We got a heart rhythm back, and it's
so how long?
It may be alive enough to go to the OR, but how his brain recovers after all that downtime is unknown. Could be badly stroked. So it's definitely not good.
Where was he shot? Do you know?
Reginald was shot in the lower left area near his groin. He was shot by this special ammunition called RIP.
RIP, or radically invasive projectile ammunition. This ammunition is meant to cause as much damage to someone's internal organs as possible.
This type of ammunition is not your normal 9mm ammunition that you would buy to go target shooting at a gun range.
It is these special bullets that are designed when they enter into a body to split into multiple pieces. The bullet spidered into his body and basically shredded his insides.
It was difficult, though, for Kiara due to the shock that she had just witnessed Reginald Ward be shot right in front of her.
I don't want to talk.
Pardon me?
I don't want to talk, and I'm not talking about anything right now. I have to think about my life.
Investigators searched the area around the crime scene for more surveillance cameras.
We start looking at businesses in the area, and one of the closest ones was Flowerama across the street.
Hi, I'm with Cedar Rapids PD. I need to review your surveillance footage for this morning.
They had a camera that was pointing towards Come and Go, and it also gets the entrance and exit location off of First Avenue.
Start just before 8 a.m. There's the car.
At 7:49 a.m., I observed Reginald Ward's black Monte Carlo entering the gas station. It was being followed very closely by a gold-colored sedan. They pull up to the pumps and stop.
We think we have this perfect view, but there's this black pickup truck that's blocking a half of it.
Punch in there.
We were able to enlarge the Flyerama video surveillance. We're able to see Reginald Ward exit his vehicle. He's identified because he has a white T-shirt on. The individual in the gold car is wearing all dark clothing.
The two individuals kind of keep a brief distance from each other. They're not face to face. They're not in each other's nose to nose. But there is definitely, by the body language, there's some words being exchanged.
Back into the vehicle. The shooter gets back into his gold car and makes a fast exit from the gas station.
Kiara gets in the driver's seat with Reginald. She starts to go past the gas pumps, goes onto the southwest side of the gas station parking lot, abruptly stops.
Kiara exits the driver's side and runs around to the passenger's door. Bystanders then emerge from the come and go and heads towards the black Monte Carlo to help Reggie.
Can you clean that up?
We are hoping to not only see what happened, but also try and get a license plate or a possible identification made on the shooter. We were unable to get a license plate or description of the driver, but we were able to get a description of the gold color sedan. It was a Ford Fusion.
Okay, thanks.
Across town, Reggie's family learn about the shooting.
Hello? My cousin called me. She said, Zan, LaRidge got shot. She's crying. And I'm like, what happened? She said, I don't know. I hang up the phone. I scream.
Investigators return to the hospital to speak to Kiara again.
We asked her what happened that morning. Kiara said that she was on her way to work.
She tells investigators that she and Reggie left her apartment together.
Did he stay all night with you last night?
Mm-hmm.
When you guys were driving to work, what happened on the way up to the gas station?
Well, nothing. Basically, there was a car that we went to the gas station and they went to the gas station.
Okay. Where did you first see that car at?
I wasn't paying attention. I didn't expect a car. I didn't know this until the car pulled in too.
We asked Kiara to try and explain what had happened, as we had told her that witnesses knew that she was right there.
From the confrontation that some of the witnesses talked about, they said there might have been more to, what was going on, So, well, that's just their perception.
How can they sit up there and say that?
Well, they're saying that one car almost chased the other car into the parking lot.
They can't know what's going on when I don't even know.
Yeah.
She really was difficult and didn't want to answer the question. Kiara, to me, seemed like she didn't want to help us.
She was at the scene. She saw the shooter. We needed to expand our investigation further, so we got a search warrant for Kiara's apartment. The night we did the search warrant at Kiara's apartment, we observed there was multiple surveillance cameras on the outside of her building and the local businesses.
All right. Why don't you go check out these businesses? Huh?
The apartment of Kiara Morse was searched in an attempt to find potentially any evidence that would lead us to a suspect of this shooting.
Check those cupboards. Hey.
We located some 9mm ammunition in a drawer in the kitchen.
The rounds found were different from the 9mm rounds that were actually used in the shooting.
Hey.
We found a note that said, "I miss you," and it was signed Todrick.
They don't know who Todrick is. They don't have a connection. What's going on? Is this potentially a connection to the shooting, or is this some random note?
Jacob.
The next day, we got a call from St. Luke's Hospital that Reginald Ward had been pronounced dead.
When Reginald Ward died, we have something that went from a potential attempted homicide to a homicide case.
The news of Reggie's death reaches his friends.
I woke up and I seen some missed calls from my friend, and I called him back to see, you know, what was going on. I took it real hard. It really hurt. It was devastating. Reggie was like my little brother. Hearing something had happened to him, I kind of felt like it was on my watch.
My cousin called me, and she said, "Zan, he gone." Oh my God. And I was like, what? What you mean he gone? She said, he gone. And she screamed. And I screamed. And I cried so hard. And I'm like, no.
DeVore.
The day after the shooting, we received an anonymous call saying that Kiara and her boyfriend Reginald were having problems with a ex-boyfriend. This anonymous caller did name the ex-boyfriend as Todd Jenkins. We then remembered the note we found in Kiara's apartment, "I miss you, Todrick," and we felt there's probably a connection.
Thanks. Got a name?
When I learned that Kiara had problems with an ex-boyfriend, that's a red flag to me.
We may have found a motive for Reginald's killing, but we need to do more investigation and find out more information about Todd Jenkins.
We find that he's from Davenport, Iowa, which is about an hour and a half from Cedar Rapids. So when he'd been previously arrested, also in Iowa for misdemeanor crime. Where that crime occurred, they took a .40 caliber pistol from him. The trace on the firearm shows that it was purchased from a gun store in Davenport.
Hi, I'm calling from Cedar Rapids PD.
Contacting that gun store, we find that Todd Jenkins had recently purchased a Glock 9mm pistol. We also found that he had purchased RIP ammunition from this gun store.
RIP, you're sure?
The same ammunition that was used to kill Reginald Ward. This ammunition was so rare that even the gun shop owner said, I've only sold one box to one person, and it was this person, Todd Jenkins.
Okay, thanks.
On Monday, November the 4th, we'd received video surveillance from Kiara's apartment building and local businesses.
Hey, take a look at this.
The video surveillance from Kiara's building, it shows us a wide angle of the parking lot and the entrance into the building.
Kiara's apartment is only a few minutes' drive away from the come-and-go where Reggie was shot at 7:51 a.m.
Start at 7:45.
At 7:46 a.m. on the surveillance video, we see two figures exit the apartment building and then get into a black Monte Carlo.
Punch it in.
Those two individuals we see is Reginald Ward and Kiara. And we see them walk to the parking spot where Reginald's car is parked. Reginald get into the driver's seat, Kiara get into the passenger seat. We then see the vehicle start to back up from its parking spot.
Good thing.
As Reginald and the black Monte Carlo back out away from their spot, on the corner of the building, I notice a gold-colored sedan back up and head towards the black Monte Carlo.
The Gold Ford Fusion pulls up so that each car could see who's in the other car.
We see the black Monte Carlo leave the scene. At that point, the Gold Ford Fusion spins around and we see it speed out of camera in order to pursue this Monte Carlo.
So after watching this surveillance footage, we now know that the gold-colored sedan was pursuing Reginald in his black Monte Carlo.
We also have some footage from a local shop.
Scooter's coffee shop sits on the east side of the building.
This would be right beside the suspect vehicle.
Started earlier to find out when the car arrives.
At 7:26 a.m., we observed the gold-colored sedan drive through the parking lot at Kiara's apartment building and pull into the Scooter's parking lot.
Let's see if they get out.
The gold-colored sedan had parked and stayed there for 20 minutes, and the driver had not left this vehicle. The driver had parked and waited for Reggie and Kiara to leave.
This wasn't an accidental shooting. This wasn't by mistake. That this was actually a planned out murder execution.
Go back to where it pulls in.
We observed the gold-colored sedan pull into a parking spot.
Punch in there.
That's when we're able to see the license plate.
Check the license.
We were able to locate the registered owner of the vehicle. It was a relative of Todd Jenkins.
The car belongs to Todd's sister, Brianna Sanders Benavides. Investigators put out an alert to locate the gold Ford.
The Davenport Police Department finds the vehicle in Davenport and abandoned on the street. I contacted Brenda Vitavides about her gold Ford Fusion to find out who would have had the car in Cedar Rapids at the time of the murder. In speaking with her, she does confirm that Todd Jenkins is her brother. She wouldn't tell me, though, who had the car when it was in Cedar Rapids. So a search warrant was obtained for the vehicle. Our crime scene investigators search the car and find that it's been thoroughly cleaned by someone. We do get a break, however, and find that the car had what's called an infotainment center.
That infotainment center stores all the vehicle's data about where that vehicle was, where that vehicle went.
The GPS data confirms that the gold Ford Fusion was at the come and go at the time of the murder.
Investigators analyzed the Ford's movements before the murder for clues that could identify the shooter.
At 5:58 a.m., the vehicle stopped at the intersection of First Avenue and 11th Street in Cedar Rapids. The vehicle stopped there for 2 minutes.
It went right next to Casey's, located in the 1200 block First Avenue, which is 2 blocks away from Kiara's apartment.
I also know from my experience that this Casey convenience store has surveillance video.
I'll check that.
I followed up with this information and went to the Casey's.
Hi, Investigator DeVore, Cedar Rapids PD. I need to review your surveillance footage for October 30th. Can you start just before 6 a.m.?
At 5:58, we were able to see this gold Ford Fusion on the front cameras. We're able to see the suspect get out, and then we see the suspect enter the store.
Have you got any cameras inside?
And when he walks through the door, you're able to see who it is.
There, punching on his face?
I was able to cross-reference his face with a driver's license photo of Todd Jenkins. This person is Kiara's ex-boyfriend. Todd Jenkins approaches the counter, cashes in 2 lottery tickets, then leaves the store. On the exterior camera, you can see Todd pull away in the gold-colored sedan and head towards Kiara's apartment.
Have you still got those lottery tickets? Thanks.
Not only do we have a picture now, but we have the lottery tickets that he used that morning, and he signs Todd Jenkins.
That's the break we've been looking for. Now we knew the identity of the shooter and the past relationship and history with Kiara. At this stage, we were able to prove she was lying because she knows who the shooter is.
While officers track down Todd Jenkins, investigators secure Kiara's cell phone records. They review the calls from October 30th, the day Reggie was shot.
There was a phone call 2 minutes prior to the murder where Todd called Kiara. This shows that he called while he was chasing Reginald Ward and Kiara Morrissey down First Avenue towards the Come and Go store. Also, there's a text message from her to Todd Jenkins that says, "If you want to fight or shoot this man, you have to be ready."
We realized Kiara was not telling the truth of what happened in the shooting.
Investigators go to her apartment.
Hi, Kiara. How are you doing?
What's up?
Oh, we've tried leaving you messages, and you're not returning our calls.
Because I don't have time for that right now.
We're doing our job, but can we come in and talk to you?
Okay, sure.
We asked Kiara about a phone call at 7:47 a.m., just 2 minutes before the shooting. You guys were driving down the road on First Avenue. Did you talk to Todd at that time?
I don't know. I can't remember. I can't remember who I talked to for 2 minutes.
Let's get past the I don't know stuff, okay? You want to tell us the truth?
I can only tell you what I know for a fact is the truth.
We asked her if she has spoke with Todd Jenkins since the shooting.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
How many times do you think you've talked to him?
I don't know.
You guys,
talked to a lot of people.
well, I know you talk to a lot of people. You've told me that over and over. So, have you talked to him? Is he still in Davenport?
I don't know. I'm done until I talk to him.
Kiara was to the point where she doesn't want to answer questions truthfully.
From my experience, I believe that Kiara was being evasive.
We're feeling comfortable that we can file our charges. But we have no idea where Todd is. He's basically went off the grid.
I need a warrant for Todd Jenkins. Thanks.
When reviewing Kiara Morrissey's phone records further, I found that she had called the Quality Inn in Aurora, Illinois on March 7th.
Hi, Cedar Rapids Police Department.
Officers speak to somebody at the front desk. They verify there is a Todd Jenkins staying there.
Can you send over your security footage?
We received video surveillance footage from the lobby of this Quality Inn.
Hey, take a look at this.
It's Todd.
It's Kiara.
You can clearly see Todd Jenkins and Kiara Morrissey together in the lobby. This does show that Kiara Morrissey, Todd Jenkins, they're back together since this crime had been committed on October 30th of 2019.
Put me through to the U.S. Marshal, Illinois office.
We called in our U.S. Marshals to go to Aurora to the hotel to see if Todd was still there. And Todd was at the hotel with Kiara.
On March 26, 2020, U.S. Marshals take Todd Jenkins into custody.
He was transferred to the Kendall County Jail in Illinois. I did interview Todd inside the jail.
Well, I want to take you back to October 30th of 2019. Were you in Cedar Rapids that day?
No, not.
You weren't?
No.
Do you remember where you were that day?
No, I was kind of hungover, so.
Kind of hungover?
Yeah.
He would never admit that he was in Cedar Rapids. I later showed him a still photograph of him inside the Casey store
That's you. In a Casey's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa on October 30th of 2019. Why were you there?
I don't know who that is, officer.
Okay, well, that's you.
Given all the evidence that had been gathered in this investigation, I knew that Todd Jenkins was lying. The investigation clearly showed that he was the killer of Reginald Ward.
We had charged Kiara with accessory after the fact. However, we came up with this proffer agreement where Kiara testified in court. We were willing to dismiss the charge against her.
Since she cooperated, part of her deal was we decided to dismiss the case against her so she has no charges, she had no punishment, and that she was free to go.
Investigators find no evidence that Brianna Sanders Benavides, Todd's sister and the owner of the Ford Fusion, had any knowledge of or involvement in Reggie's murder. She is charged with no crimes. In May 2021, Todd Jenkins waives his right to a jury and opts for a bench trial.
This was a case where we had so much surveillance video that you can't contradict that.
Prosecutors pieced together the events that led to Reggie's murder.
Reggie and Kiara have been dating for over a year. Kiara's ex, Todd Jenkins, is jealous of their relationship. He decides if he can't have Kiara, then neither can Reggie. On the morning of October 30th, Todd drives his sister's gold Ford Fusion. He parks at Scooter's Coffee under Kiara Morris's apartment building.
Todd has with him the Glock 9mm pistol and the RIP ammunition that he had purchased weeks prior. He then puts his plan into action the moment that Kiara and Reggie exit Kiara's apartment.
He pursues Reggie and even calls Kiara from behind the wheel. Kiara and Reggie pull into come and go. Todd follows.
What's up, man? What you doing with my girl, bro? What's up? What's up?
Todd confronts Reggie and then shoots him. Todd then drives to Muscatine, where police believe that Todd throws the gun into the Mississippi River.
A judge finds Todd Jenkins guilty of first-degree murder. On September 29, 2021, Todd Jenkins is sentenced to life without parole.
The surveillance video was invaluable in this case. It allowed us to piece together this crime to see how aggressive Todd was in his pursuit that day of Reggie and how set he was that he was going to confront Reggie that day and kill him because of his jealousy.
Building the case against Todd Jenkins. We would not have got this conviction, and I don't know if we would have got charges filed and ever resolved the case without surveillance footage.
Todd Jenkins was an absolute coward. You had to pull a gun and shoot my brother while he was walking away. Over a girl? She meant that much. And don't nobody got it now. Because my brother dead and you in prison for the rest of your life.
He's gone, and no matter what I do or say or how I feel, like, he'll never come back, and it's just something that I'm gonna have to live with. So I got a tattoo for Reggie. It says LLR, and it's...
The rainy neon reflection of Seattle in the late 90s was supposed to be a backdrop for grunge music, coffee culture, and tech booms. But beneath the commercial veneer lay a dark, damp reality that swallowed human lives whole. It was November 12th, 1998, when the emerald canopy of the Pacific Northwest became an emerald shroud for 18-year-old high school senior Chloe Sterling. Her car was found idling on the edge of the Aurora Avenue Bridge, driver's side door flung wide open, headlights cutting uselessly through the thick, swirling Puget Sound fog. Inside the vehicle, everything was eerily intact. Her purse rested on the passenger seat, her favorite cassette tape was still playing a low, distorted melody, and her car keys dangled from the ignition, clinking rhythmically against the steering column. But Chloe was gone, leaving behind no footprints on the wet asphalt, no signs of a struggle on the rusted bridge railing, and absolutely no clues to explain how a girl with a full university scholarship could vanish into thin air between her evening library shift and her drive home. The city's emerald heart froze that night as the news broke across the local television stations, breaking the peaceful illusion of the suburban neighborhoods and replacing it with a suffocating, omnipresent dread that lingered over every dark alley and rain-slicked highway. Police cruisers swarmed the bridge, Marine units dragged the icy, unforgiving waters below, and search dogs barked frantically into the misty void, but the environment yielded nothing but silence, cold air, and the distant, mocking horns of cargo ships navigating the black waters. Days bled into agonizing weeks of unanswered questions, and the initial frantic energy of the search slowly gave way to a cold, creeping realization that the answers were not trapped at the bottom of the Sound. They were hiding in plain sight, buried beneath layers of family secrets and community silence. Chloe's younger sister, 19-year-old dynamic student Maya Sterling, became the public face of the tragedy, her tear-stained face plastered across missing person flyers plastered on every telephone pole from downtown Seattle to the Canadian border. Maya stood before the television cameras at every press conference, her voice trembling but resolute, pleading with the public to bring her sister home, describing Chloe as her best friend, her protector, and her absolute anchor in a volatile world. The Sterling household became a fortress of grief, a silent brick colonial home in the affluent neighborhood of Queen, and where the curtains remained permanently drawn and the phone sat like a ticking time bomb on the kitchen counter. Investigators combed through Chloe's life, dissecting her friendships, her diary entries, her school records, and her brief romantic history, searching for any hidden enemy, any dangerous obsession, or any secret double life that could explain her sudden, violent erasure. Yet, every lead they chased dissolved into a dead end. Her boyfriend had an ironclad alibi, her classmates spoke of her with nothing but admiration, and the phantom stranger who might have pulled her from her car remained just that, a phantom, an invisible predator conjured by the collective terror of a city desperately trying to make sense of the unthinkable. For over 25 long years, the file lay in the deepest, coldest drawers of the Seattle Police Department's archive room, a monument to human limitation and a constant, aching wound for a community that never truly recovered from the shock. The yellowing paperwork grew brittle. The original cassette tape from Chloe's car sat silent in an evidence bag, and the detectives who had sworn to solve the mystery grew old and retired, passing the heavy burden down to a new generation of lawmen who knew the case only as a legendary local ghost story. The world outside transformed completely. The analog 70s and 90s gave way to the digital age. Smartphones replaced payphones, and advanced forensic science began to illuminate the dark corners of historical crimes, but the Sterling case remained stubbornly locked in its frozen state. Maya Sterling grew up under the heavy shadow of her sister's ghost, remaining in Seattle, building a career as a child psychologist and constantly participating in cold case advocacy panels, her life seemingly dedicated to ensuring that Chloe's memory was never entirely swallowed by the passage of time. To the public, Maya was a heroic survivor, a beacon of resilience who had channeled her personal devastation into a life of service, a sister whose love was so fierce that she refused to let the flame of hope die out, even when the police department officially classified the file as an inactive cold case. The explosive shattering of this 26-year-old illusion did not begin with a dramatic forensic breakthrough, a newly discovered DNA match, or a deathbed confession from a hardened criminal. It began with a quiet, agonizing breakdown inside a sterile police interrogation room in downtown Seattle. In the spring of 2024, A specialized cold case task force, utilizing newly developed digital matrix analysis tools, began reviewing the original 1998 witness statements, looking for tiny, microscopic inconsistencies that human eyes had missed in the chaotic aftermath of the initial disappearance. They noticed a subtle, 3-minute discrepancy in Maya Sterling's timeline of that fateful November night, an anomaly so small it had been dismissed as the natural confusion of a traumatized teenager, but one that modern investigative protocols demanded they clear up. Maya was invited to the precinct under the guise of a routine informational update, a standard procedure she had complied with dozens of times over the decades without hesitation, walking into the room with her usual calm, professional demeanor. But as the detectives gently laid out the newly mapped digital timeline, showing that her car had crossed an automated toll point near the Aurora Avenue Bridge precisely 4 minutes before Chloe's vehicle was abandoned, the polished mask of the grieving sister began to crack, revealing a deep, terrifying abyss of hidden torment. The atmosphere inside the room turned suffocatingly tense as the hours ticked by, the soft hum of the recording equipment capturing the sudden, erratic shift in Maya's breathing and the tight, white-knuckled grip she maintained on her plastic water cup. The seasoned interrogators did not push or accuse. They simply waited, letting the weight of the 26-year-old lie crush her defenses from the inside out until the psychological dam broke with a sudden, choked gasp that echoed like a gunshot through the small room. With her head buried in her hands and her body shaking with a violent, cathartic rhythm, Maya Sterling opened her mouth and unleashed a confession so shocking, so utterly depraved in its long-term deception, that it paralyzed the seasoned investigators sitting across from her. She confessed that there was no phantom predator, no random carjacking, and no tragic suicide on the bridge. She admitted that she was the one who had driven Chloe's car to the Aurora Avenue Bridge. She was the one who had left the engine idling and the door wide open. And she was the one who had systematically orchestrated the entire disappearance to cover up a horrific family secret that had turned deadly in the dark woods outside the city. The dinned-out, rapid-fire details of the confession painted a horrifying picture of jealousy, betrayal, and a sudden, uncontrolled flash of violence that had occurred hours before the car was abandoned on the bridge, far away from the flashing lights of Aurora Avenue. On that cold November evening in 1998, an intense, long-smoldering argument had erupted between the two sisters inside a secluded cabin owned by their family near the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, fueled by years of sibling rivalry and a devastating discovery Chloe had made regarding Maya's secret, destructive behavior. The confrontation escalated with terrifying speed, moving from screaming accusations to physical violence until Maya, consumed by a blind, sociopathic rage, struck her sister with a heavy, blunt object, killing her instantly on the cabin's wooden floor. Panic, cold and absolute, replaced her anger as she stared at her sister's lifeless body, forcing her teenage mind to instantly pivot from a sister to a criminal mastermind, calculating a way to erase her crime before the morning sun could expose her. She loaded Chloe's body into the trunk of her own car, drove out to an isolated, unmarked logging road deep within the mountainous wilderness, and buried her sister in a shallow, muddy grave beneath the damp ferns, leaving her to be consumed by the unforgiving Pacific Northwest earth. But burying the body was only the first step in Maya's calculated survival plan. She knew that if Chloe simply disappeared from the cabin, the police would instantly focus their investigation on the family and the property, tracing the violence back to her within days. She drove back into Seattle, took Chloe's car from the library parking lot where it had been left, and drove it to the Aurora Avenue Bridge, a notorious local hotspot for suicides and late-night crimes, staging the scene to look like a sudden, chaotic abduction or a desperate leap into the freezing waters below. She left the door open, left the purse, and left the music playing, creating a perfect, cinematic tableau of mystery that she knew would baffle investigators and direct the entire narrative away from the mountains and away from herself. She then walked through the foggy night back to her own vehicle, which she had parked blocks away, returned home, and slipped into her bed, waiting for the morning phone call that would announce her sister's disappearance, ready to step into the role of the devastated, innocent sibling she would play for the next 26 years. The public release of Maya's confession sent a monumental shockwave through Seattle, destroying the collective memory of the tragedy and replacing it with a profound, sickening sense of violation that touched every citizen who had ever wept for the Sterling family. The woman they had championed as a symbol of sisterly devotion, the psychologist who had counseled traumatized children, the activist who had demanded justice for cold case victims, was revealed to be the very monster she had spent decades publicly hunting. The media frenzy was instantaneous and aggressive, news vans surrounding the Queen and colonial home once again, but this time, the cameras were tracking the arrival of forensic teams equipped with ground-penetrating radar, preparing to head out to the dark mountain woods to retrieve what was left of Chloe Sterling. The courtroom during the arraignment was a claustrophobic pressure cooker of emotion, packed with childhood friends, former investigators, and citizens who stared at Maya in her orange jumpsuit, trying to find a trace of the grieving teenager in the cold, detached expression of the woman standing before the judge. As the forensic units excavated the remote mountain site, fighting against decades of root growth and soil shifting, they finally uncovered the skeletal remains of Chloe Sterling, still wearing the silver graduation ring that her parents had given her just months before her life was stolen. The recovery of the body brought a grim, agonizing closure to the legal mystery, but it opened a deeper, more permanent wound within the community's psyche, forcing everyone to confront the terrifying reality of human deception. Maya Sterling's 26-year performance was exposed as an act of pure, unadulterated psychopathy, a killer who didn't hide in the shadows, but who wrapped herself in the grief of her victim, using the public's sympathy as an impenetrable shield against suspicion. The cold case was officially solved, the phantom on the bridge was unmasked, but the echo of Chloe's 1998 disappearance would linger forever in the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, a permanent, haunting reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we look for in the dark, but the ones who hold our hands while we weep. The rain that fell over the Cascade foothills during the excavation of the logging road was identical to the rain that had washed away the evidence on the Aurora Avenue Bridge 26 years prior, cold, relentless, and indifferent to the human horrors it covered. The forensic anthropologist knelt in the thick, black mud, her fingers carefully clearing away the rotting cedar needles and tangled roots that had woven themselves through the rib cage of Chloe Sterling's remains. Every movement was recorded by a videographer from the State Crime Lab, the harsh, battery-powered floodlights casting long, distorted shadows against the towering pine trees that stood like silent sentinels around the burial site. This was the true ending of the story that had begun in a flash of teenage rage inside a warm cabin, a quiet, mechanical exhumation of a forgotten life, witnessed only by law enforcement officers, scientists, and the distant, lonely cry of crows circling the gray mountain sky. The soil here was highly acidic, typical of the Pacific Northwest wilderness, a chemical environment that had aggressively broken down the soft tissue and the fabric of her clothing, leaving behind only the dense bone structure and the unyielding silver of her high school ring to tell the story of her final moments. Back in the downtown precinct, Detective Thorne sat at his desk, staring through the glass partition at the holding cell where Maya Sterling was being kept prior to her transfer to the county jail. She sat perfectly still on the metal bench, her back straight against the concrete wall, her eyes fixed on a single point on the floor with a terrifying, vacant intensity that suggested she was completely detached from the reality of her collapse. He thought about the dozens of times he had met her over the years at charity events and cold case galas, remembering the warmth of her handshake, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, and the profound, moving eloquence of her speeches about the pain of losing a sibling. It was now painfully clear that her entire adult life had been a masterfully orchestrated counterintelligence operation, a continuous, daily campaign to control the narrative, stay ahead of the investigation, and ensure that no one ever looked at the family cabin or the younger sister who had returned home late on a rainy November night. Her career choice, her public advocacy, her self-sacrificing devotion to her parents, everything had been a layer of armor, a calculated social camouflage designed to make her so untouchable that the mere suggestion of her involvement would be viewed as an act of cruel insanity. The psychological profile that began to emerge from the state psychologists who evaluated Maya in the days following her confession painted a picture of a textbook covert narcissist, an individual capable of compartmentalizing an act of extreme violence so completely that she was able to live a secondary, highly productive life without a single flicker of conscious guilt. To Maya, the murder of her sister was not a moral atrocity that required penance. It was a catastrophic crisis that required management, a problem to be solved through logistics, staging, and a lifetime of flawless emotional performance. She had stepped into the role of the grieving sister with the same dedication an actress brings to a career-defining performance, adapting her emotions to meet the expectations of the public, the media, and the police department until the lie became more real than the truth. The terrifying realization for the investigators was that if they hadn't implemented the digital matrix analysis tools, if they hadn't caught that tiny 3-minute anomaly in her historical timeline, Maya Sterling would have gone to her grave as a celebrated community hero, carrying the secret of her sister's murder into eternity, while the city continued to look for a phantom predator on the bridge. The reaction from the Sterling family's surviving relatives and friends was a mixture of absolute cognitive dissonance and profound, paralyzing horror that tore through the social fabric of their queen and neighborhood like a physical explosion. Chloe and Maya's parents had both passed away in the early 2010s, their health broken by decades of unresolved grief and the agonizing weight of their eldest daughter's mystery, leaving their estate and their memory entirely in Maya's hands. Childhood friends who had grown up with the sisters, who had stayed overnight at the brick colonial home and wept with Maya at the annual vigils on the bridge, found themselves questioning every memory, every shared confidence, and every interaction they had ever had with the younger sister. The horror was not just that Chloe had been murdered, it was that her murderer had been there for every holiday, every family dinner, and every milestone, wearing her sister's clothes, living in her house, and consuming the love and sympathy that belonged to the dead. The collective trauma of the community manifested as a deep, corrosive cynicism, a feeling that if a devotion that pure could be a cover for a crime that monstrous, then nothing in the human world could ever be trusted again. The legal proceedings against Maya Sterling moved forward with an icy, bureaucratic inevitability that stood in stark contrast to the sensationalized media storm outside the courthouse walls. The district attorney's office announced that they would be seeking the maximum penalty for aggravated first-degree murder, citing the extreme premeditation involved in the staging of the crime scene and the decades-long deception that followed. Maya's defense team, realizing the absolute futility of fighting a confession backed by the physical recovery of the remains and the digital timeline data, focused their efforts on securing a plea agreement that would remove the possibility of the death penalty or indefinite solitary confinement. Throughout the hearings, as the details of the skull fracture and the shallow grave were read into the public record, Maya remained completely unmoving, her face an impenetrable mask of psychological withdrawal that defied any attempt to read her internal state. When the judge finally handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, she simply nodded once, turned her back on the gallery of weeping onlookers, and walked out of the courtroom through the secure side door, her handcuffs clinking softly against her waist chain. The Aurora Avenue Bridge still stands, its gray steel structure spanning the black waters of the Ship Canal, its lanes crowded with daily commuters who hurry home through the relentless Seattle rain, entirely focused on their own lives. But the vehicle that idled there on November 12, 1998, no longer represents an unsolved mystery, an elusive predator, or a tragic leap into the void. It stands as a historical monument to the terrifying capacity of human deception. The flyers have long since dissolved into the mud. The candle wax on the pavement has been scrubbed away by decades of winter storms, and the name Chloe Sterling has finally been moved from the active cold case boards to the registry of the recovered dead. The town is left with a quiet, devastating realization that the darkness we fear is not something that waits for us in the isolated corners of the city or the violent impulses of drifting strangers. The deepest, most incurable darkness can be born in the heart of our own homes, nurtured by jealousy, protected by a brilliant, psychopathic intellect, and hidden behind the loving smile of a sister who promises she will never stop looking for you. The transition from the sterile environment of the King County Superior Court to the high-security concrete cells of the Washington Corrections Center for Women was the final, absolute erasure of the public persona Maya Sterling had manufactured over 26 years. There were no more television cameras to capture her dignified grief, no more podiums from which she could command the attention of a sympathetic city, and no more professional titles to shield her from the raw reality of her actions. Strung together with a dozen other inmates in a heavy transport van, she watched through the reinforced wire mesh as the skyline of Seattle, the city she had manipulated with such clinical precision, faded into the gray, low-hanging mist of the Puget Sound. Her identification was reduced to a 7-digit state inmate number, her sophisticated wardrobe replaced by the uniform orange cotton twill, her legacy transformed from a tragic, resilient survivor into one of the most chilling case studies of domestic psychopathy in the history of the Pacific Northwest. In the prison logs, she was noted as an inmate of exceptional compliance, moving through the intake protocols, the psychological evaluations, and the cell assignments with a cold, mechanical detachment that suggested she had already accepted her new reality as simply another system to be navigated. Inside the archives of the Seattle Police Department's Homicide Unit, the physical file of the 1998 investigation was finally subjected to a comprehensive administrative closing procedure, a process that felt more like an autopsy of a 40-volume lie than a standard piece of paperwork. Detective Thorne spent days systematically cross-referencing Maya's modern confession with the hundreds of tips, witness interviews, and alternative suspect files that had been generated over nearly 3 decades of investigative frustration. He discovered that in the winter of 1999, less than a year after the murder, an anonymous tipster had actually called the precinct, stating they had seen a vehicle matching Maya's car parked near the family's Logging Road property on the night of Chloe's disappearance. But the tip had been discarded within 48 hours because the lead investigator at the time could not reconcile the image of a distraught, weeping 19-year-old sister with the cold-blooded calculation required to dispose of a body in the mountain wilderness. The file was a devastating testament to the power of human bias. The investigators had failed to see the killer because they were entirely blinded by the masterpiece of performance art Maya was delivering on the evening news every single night. The family cabin near the Cascade foothills, the physical space where Chloe's life had been violently cut short, became an object of morbid fascination and intense legal scrutiny as forensic teams conducted a secondary, deep extraction search of the property. Although the cabin had been rented out to various families and subjected to multiple superficial renovations over 26 years, modern forensic chemicals like Blue Star and luminol revealed the hidden geometry of the 1998 violence beneath the modern hardwood flooring. When the lights were extinguished, the chemical agent reacted with the microscopic iron traces left by ancient bloodstains, causing the living room floor to glow with a brilliant, luminescent blue that mapped out the exact trajectory of the struggle and the final, fatal blow. The science proved that despite the passage of time, despite the scrubbing, the painting, and the changing of tenants, the physical environment remembers the crimes committed within its walls, holding on to the evidence with an unyielding chemical tenacity until the right tools arrive to draw it out into the light. The wider academic and psychological communities in Seattle, where Maya had once been a respected and influential figure, were plunged into a period of profound institutional soul-searching and professional embarrassment. The papers she had published on adolescent trauma, the lectures she had delivered at the University of Washington regarding the long-term psychological impacts of violent crime on surviving family members, everything was reevaluated through the terrifying lens of her true identity. It became clear that her entire body of professional work was not an effort to heal others, but a deeply twisted, narcissistic exercise in self-analysis and self-preservation. She had used her access to advanced psychological theories to refine her own camouflage, studying the behavior of genuine victims to ensure her own staged reactions were clinically perfect, completely indistinguishable from real grief. Her colleagues realized, with a sickening sense of clarity, that they had allowed active killer to educate their students, shape their therapeutic protocols, and gain access to vulnerable children who were seeking shelter from their own familial nightmares. The Queen and Colonial Home, The brick fortress, where the Sterling sisters had grown up and where their parents had died in a state of manufactured ignorance, was placed on the real estate market by a court-appointed executor to pay for the extensive legal fees and restitution demands associated with the conviction. The house sat vacant for months, its empty windows reflecting the gray Seattle sky, a local landmark of horror that real estate agents struggled to show to prospective buyers. Neighbors walking their dogs past the property would speed up their pace, looking away from the manicured lawn where Maya had once stood holding candles for her missing sister, the beautiful facade of the house now permanently stained by the knowledge of the absolute betrayal that had lived within its walls. The interior of the house was completely emptied of its contents. The family photographs, the school trophies, and the furniture sold or discarded, erasing the physical footprint of a family lineage that had been utterly destroyed not by an external tragedy, but by its own blood. As the months transitioned into the winter of 2024, the initial media circus surrounding the Sterling confession began to recede from the front-page headlines, replaced by the rapid, dinned-out cycle of modern news and new urban tragedies. But for those who lived through the long 26-year mystery, the resolution brought no sense of peace, no triumphant feeling of justice achieved. It left behind only a lingering, radioactive residue of doubt that contaminated their relationship with the city itself. The Aurora Avenue Bridge remained a place of traffic and fog, but for the residents who remembered 1998, it became a symbol of a different kind of danger. Not the danger of jumping into the dark waters, but the danger of believing the stories we are told by those who claim to love us the most. The cold case was solved, the paperwork was stamped, and the remains of Chloe Sterling were finally laid to rest in a quiet cemetery beside her parents. But the true horror of her story remains alive in the knowledge that the face of our protector can be the face of our executioner, and that the long journey toward the truth can lead us into an abyss from which our faith in humanity can never return. The daily schedule within the maximum security wing of the Washington Corrections Center for Women left no room for the internal luxury of identity or memory. It was an unyielding environment of steel gates, concrete corridors, and the sharp, echoing commands of corrections officers. For Maya Sterling, now designated permanently as inmate 441-98S, the infinite expanses of her former professional life were condensed into an 8 by 10-foot cell containing a stainless steel toilet, a concrete bunk, and a single narrow slit of reinforced glass that looked out onto a gravel exercise yard. She adjusted to the institutional monotony with a chilling, clinical precision that unsettled both the prison staff and her fellow inmates, showing no signs of the psychological deterioration or emotional collapse typical of high-profile individuals entering long-term confinement. She spent her designated library hours reading dense treatises on neurobiology and advanced criminal law, her face remaining entirely unreadable as she moved through the yard, her behavior a testament to an absolute capacity for isolation and emotional containment. In the outer world, the narrative of the Sterling case underwent a permanent transformation within the archives of true crime literature and forensic science curriculum, becoming the definitive benchmark for the study of long-term domestic deception. Criminal behavior analysts from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit traveled to Seattle to interview Detective Thorne, systematically cataloging the specific linguistic patterns and public relations strategies Maya had utilized to maintain her innocence for over a quarter of a century. The focus of the study was the terrifying concept of victim masquerade, the process by which a sophisticated offender places themselves at the epicenter of the social response to a crime, effectively manipulating the community's empathy to construct an absolute immunity from suspicion. The data gathered from the Sterling files altered the way cold case investigators across the country evaluate surviving family members in historical disappearances, forcing law enforcement to look past the performance of grief and demand the same objective verification for the closest relatives that they would for a stranger caught at the scene. The small, native limestone headstone that was placed over Chloe Sterling's final resting place in the Lake View Cemetery was simple, bearing only her name, her birth and death dates, and the inscription, "Finally in the light." The site became a quiet place of pilgrimage for the citizens of Seattle who had carried her memory through the long decades of the mystery, a physical location where they could deposit flowers, notes, and small tokens of remembrance without the suffocating presence of her sister's staged mourning. The cemetery, situated on the high ground of Capitol Hill looking out over the waters of Lake Washington, provided a peaceful, natural antithesis to the dark logging road and the rain-slicked steel of the Aurora Avenue Bridge. Here, beneath the shade of ancient cedar trees, the historical identity of the young woman who wanted to be a teacher was finally separated from the monstrous crime that had defined her legacy, allowing her memory to exist as an individual life rather than a permanent piece of criminal evidence. The family cabin in the Cascade foothills, once the secret heart of the entire tragedy, was eventually purchased by a conservation trust that demolished the wooden structure entirely, converting the property into a protected wildlife corridor connected to the surrounding national forest. The removal of the building was a deliberate act of community exorcism, an effort to ensure that the physical location could never become a destination for macabre tourism or a permanent monument to the violence of 1985. The ferns, the damp moss, and the towering Douglas firs rapidly reclaimed the clearing where the cabin had stood, the natural environment systematically erasing the scars left by human hands and human rage until the landscape looked as though it had never been disturbed. The old logging road where Chloe had been buried was blocked with heavy boulders and left to be swallowed by the aggressive growth of the forest, the precise coordinates of the shallow grave fading into the generalized geography of the mountain wilderness. As the years continue to advance into the late 2020s, the name Maya Sterling is rarely spoken aloud in the corridors of the Seattle Police Department, existing only as a dark cautionary tale whispered to rookie detectives during their initial orientation into the homicide unit. The case serves as a permanent reminder that the resolution of a cold case does not always bring the clean, cinematic redemption that the public craves, but can instead expose a deeper, more profound reservoir of human depravity that leaves the community more vulnerable than before. The city continues to navigate its relationship with the rain, the fog, and the dark waters of the Sound, the neon signs of the modern tech metropolis casting their bright reflections over streets that carry the invisible footprints of thousands of forgotten histories. The file is closed. The truth has been recorded in the unyielding text of judicial orders, and the sister who lied for 26 years sits in her concrete cell, completely silent as the relentless Pacific Northwest rain continues to wash over the gray world outside her walls. The silence that fills the concrete corridors of the high-security facility during the midnight hours is a specific, heavy quiet, broken only by the mechanical click of the guards' boots against the linoleum and the distant, metallic sigh of the ventilation system. Inmate 441-98 S does not sleep during these hours. She sits on the edge of her bunk, her hands folded in her lap, watching the slow movement of the moon's reflection as it tracks across the gray concrete floor of her cell. There is no audience left to convince, no cameras to capture her expression, no sisterly devotion left to simulate. There is only the raw, unadorned reality of a mind that has spent an entire adult lifetime constructing an elaborate, beautiful fortress out of a lie, only to watch it dismantle in a single afternoon inside an interrogation room. The terrifying depth of her composure remains unbroken, a testament to a personality type that doesn't experience regret as an emotional pain, but rather as an administrative error, a minor flaw in execution that led to a catastrophic systemic collapse. Outside the prison walls, the city of Seattle continues its rapid evolution, the skyline dominated by the glowing glass towers of global technology corporations, the analog world of 1998 existing only as a distant, nostalgic memory for the older generation of residents. The Aurora Avenue Bridge remains an essential artery of the city's transportation network, carrying hundreds of thousands of vehicles every day across the shipping canal, its gray steel arches beautiful against the backdrop of the Olympic Mountains. The commuters who drive past the spot where Chloe's car was found idling do so without looking down, the historical details of that cold November night having transitioned from an active, bleeding wound into a static line of text in an online encyclopedia. The collective memory of the city has processed the shock, compartmentalized the betrayal, and moved forward, as human communities must always do to survive the realization of their own vulnerability. The detective who broke the case, Marcus Thorne, eventually transitioned out of the homicide unit, taking a position as an instructor at the State Law Enforcement Academy, where he uses the Sterling files as the primary teaching tool for the next generation of investigator specialists. He teaches his students to look past the cinematic narratives of crime, to ignore the easy explanations offered by public sympathy, and to verify every line of history with the cold, unyielding precision of digital data and forensic chemistry. He stands before the lecture hall, displaying the side-by-side timelines of that 1998 night, showing how a 3-minute discrepancy was the thread that pulled down a 26-year empire of deception. His voice is steady, but his eyes carry the permanent, heavy cynicism of a man who looked behind the mask of a saint and found the cold, unblinking eyes of a predator staring back at him. The silver high school graduation ring that was recovered from the mountain burial site was not placed into an evidence locker or destroyed. It was delivered to a distant cousin of Chloe's, the only remaining relative who carried no connection to the violence or the deception of that fateful night. The ring sits inside a small, velvet-lined box on a dresser in a quiet home in Oregon, its surface polished clean of the mountain mud, the engravings of her initials still sharp against the metal. It is the single physical object that survived the destruction of the Sterling family, a silent, beautiful token of a young woman whose life was stolen by jealousy and whose memory was exploited by the very sister who had sworn to protect her. The ring represents the truth in its most basic form, an object that stayed intact through decades of darkness, waiting patiently beneath the earth until the world was ready to find it. As the dawn begins to break over the Puget Sound, casting a pale, cold light through the reinforced glass of the prison wing, Maya Sterling stands up from her bunk, smooths the front of her orange uniform, and prepares for the morning roll call. She has no visitors scheduled, no appeals left to file, and no hope of ever breathing the fresh air of the Cascade forests or walking the streets of the city she once commanded. She moves into the morning routine with the same flawless compliance that has defined her incarceration, her face an unreadable sheet of marble that conceals the absolute void within. The cold case is solved, the paperwork is done, and the city outside continues to live its life in the rain, entirely free from the shadow of the phantom on the bridge, but permanently changed by the knowledge that the ultimate evil can wear the face of the person we trust the most. The rhythm of the prison yard during the winter months is dictated by the bitter winds that blow off the water, forcing the inmates to huddle in small, silent groups against the chain-link fences or walk briskly along the perimeter to keep the blood moving in their limbs. Maya Sterling walks alone, her hands tucked deep into the pockets of her denim jacket, her eyes tracking the movement of the clouds above the concrete wall with the clinical detachment of an observer monitoring an experiment. She does not seek out company, and the other women in the block give her a wide, suspicious berth, instinctively sensing the absolute absence of standard human warmth behind her polite, mechanical interactions. She has become an institutional ghost, a presence that occupies space, follows every regulation to the letter, but leaves no emotional fingerprint on the environment around her, existing entirely within the secure fortress of her own internal calculations. In the legal archives of the state capitol, the transcripts of the state of Washington versus Maya Sterling are bound in heavy leather volumes, serving as a permanent legal precedent for the admissibility of digital timeline data and investigative genetic genealogy in historical homicides. The case is studied by law students and prosecutors across the nation, parsed for its technical brilliance and its terrifying exposure of the limits of traditional investigative methodology. The legal text reads with a cold, formal precision, reducing the decades of family agony, the tears on the evening news, and the excavation of the mountain grave to a series of numbered exhibits, statutory definitions, and judicial orders. It is the final, permanent translation of the Sterling tragedy into the language of the state, a system that cares nothing for the emotional devastation of the Queen and neighborhood, but demands an absolute, unyielding record of the truth. The brick colonial home on the hill was eventually purchased by a young couple from California who were entirely disconnected from the historical lore of the city, unaware of the names Chloe and Maya Sterling or the significance of the yellowed missing person flyers that had once lined the street below. They painted the exterior a bright, welcoming cream color, tore down the heavy, light-blocking drapes that had kept the interior in a state of permanent twilight, and filled the yard with the laughter of their young children and the bright colors of a northwest garden. The transformation was complete. The physical structure that had housed a generation of secrets and manufactured grief was forced back into the service of ordinary life, its past compartmentalized and buried beneath the daily routines of a new family that looked toward the future with untarnished hope. Detective Marcus Thorne stands on the observation deck of the ferry boat crossing from Seattle to Bainbridge Island, his face cold against the salt spray of the Sound, his eyes tracking the dark, familiar outline of the Aurora Avenue Bridge in the distance. He knows that the closing of the Sterling file was a technical success, a triumph of modern forensic capabilities over the limitations of the past, but he cannot shake the deep, existential chill that has settled in his chest since the afternoon of Maya's confession. He realizes that the system he spent his life serving is designed to catch criminals, to process evidence, and to enforce sentences, but it possesses absolutely no tools to repair the fundamental damage done to the community's trust. The unmasking of the sister did not heal the wound. It revealed that the wound was infinitely deeper than anyone had ever feared, a realization that leaves him looking at every friendly wave and every public display of grief with a quiet, irreversible suspicion. The rain continues to fall over Seattle, a soft, gray curtain that blurs the lines between the past and the present, washing over the asphalt of the bridge, the grass of the cemetery, and the concrete walls of the prison wing with a uniform, indifferent grace. The story of Chloe Sterling has reached its final, unalterable baseline. Her body has been recovered, her murderer has been condemned, and the lie that kept a city captive for 26 years has dissolved into the historical record. The city moves forward through the mist, its streets crowded with the lives of millions of people who carry their own hidden histories, their own private griefs, and their own capacity for deception. The file is resting in the dark. The ink is dry, and the sister who stayed in the light for so long sits in the shadow of her concrete cell, completely silent as the relentless waters of the Pacific Northwest continue to fall over the world outside. The light that filters through the high, barred windows of the prison gymnasium during the late afternoon is a pale, amber color, cutting through the dust motes that float in the quiet air of the enclosed space. Maya Sterling sits at a wooden table in the corner, her fingers moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm as she pieces together a massive, 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle provided by the Institutional Recreation Department. The image on the box is a landscape of the New England coastline, a place she has never visited, a world completely disconnected from the mountains and the rain of her own history. She works without looking at the reference image, matching the pieces purely by their shape and the subtle, microscopic transitions of color along their edges, her concentration so total that she seems to disappear into the mechanics of the task. It is the perfect metaphor for her existence, a mind capable of organizing chaos, of finding the hidden connections in a broken world, and of constructing a complete, flawless reality out of thousands of fragmented pieces. In the administrative offices of the King County Medical Examiner, the official certificate of death for Chloe Sterling was finally updated. The field-labeled cause of death changed from undetermined, missing, to blunt force trauma to the cranium, homicide, signed by the chief examiner under the date of May 14, 2024. This single piece of paper, filed away in the State Vital Statistics Registry, was the ultimate bureaucratic closing of the case, a formal correction of the historical record that stripped the 1998 night of its mystery and defined it forever as an act of human violence. The document sat alongside the death certificates of her parents, completing the tragic trilogy of a family that had been systematically eradicated by the secret malice of its youngest child, leaving behind only an empty registry of names and a collection of closed files. The Lake View Cemetery remains a sanctuary of quiet reflection amidst the urban density of Capitol Hill, its gravel paths winding through generations of Seattle's pioneers, leaders, and forgotten citizens. On Sunday mornings, a few elderly residents from the Queen and neighborhood still walk up the hill to place fresh flowers at the base of Chloe's headstone, their movements slow and quiet as they honor a promise they made to themselves decades ago to never let her memory disappear from the city's heart. They do not talk about Maya, they do not mention the confession, and they do not look at the news. They focus their attention entirely on the name carved into the limestone, ensuring that the young woman who died in 1998 is remembered for the light she brought into the world rather than the darkness that took her out of it. The wind through the cemetery trees carries the scent of salt water and pine, a clean, natural melody that continues to play over the graves long after the visitors have walked back down the hill toward their own homes. The tactical matrix tools that Thorne used to break the case have been officially integrated into the standard training curriculum for all homicide units across the state, changing the foundational methodology of cold case investigation for the foreseeable future. The system forces detectives to abandon the traditional, linear review of files and instead map out entire social networks using multidimensional timelines that expose the tiny, structural contradictions that human memory and human deception attempt to conceal. Thorne stands at the back of the academy classroom, watching the young recruits analyze historical datasets, their faces lit by the blue glare of their monitors as they learn to look past the emotional narrative of crime and focus entirely on the unyielding mathematics of time and space. He knows that these tools will unmask more phantoms, solve more cold cases, and pull down more empires of lies, but he also knows that each success will reveal a new, terrifying landscape of human betrayal that will continue to challenge their faith in the communities they are sworn to protect. The van that carries inmate 441-98's back to her cell block at the conclusion of the evening recreation hour moves slowly across the asphalt yard, the iron gates sliding shut behind it with a heavy, metallic crash that signals the absolute end of another day of confinement. Maya looks out the window at the gray, towering walls of the facility, her expression carrying no trace of despair, no flicker of longing, and no sign of fear as she prepares to step back into the small, concrete world that will be her home for the remainder of her life. The mask she wore for 26 years has been replaced by the permanent reality of her sentence, but the internal structure of her mind remains completely intact, a cold, unyielding diamond of self-preservation that will continue to exist in the dark, entirely untouched by the world outside. The rain over Seattle has stopped for the evening, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the glow of the city's neon lights, the air clean and cold as the night settles over the Puget Sound. The Aurora Avenue Bridge stands empty for a brief moment between the evening rush hour and the late-night commercial traffic, its gray steel arches beautiful against the black expanse of the water below. The case is solved, the phantom has been erased, and the city continues to breathe, its life moving forward through the darkness with the absolute, unyielding resilience of a community that has looked into the ultimate abyss of human deception and chosen to keep walking toward the light. The final shift of the night watch inside the secure control room is an exercise in absolute vigilance, the operators monitoring dozens of video feeds that display the silent, sleeping profiles of hundreds of inmates locked within their identical concrete cells. On Monitor 12, Inmate 441-98's remains perfectly motionless on her bunk, her eyes closed, her breathing regular and deep, her body displaying the serene, peaceful relaxation of a conscience completely unburdened by the weight of its own history. She does not dream of the cabin, she does not dream of the bridge, and she does not dream of the sister who sleeps beneath the limestone headstone on Capitol Hill. She occupies the dark with the absolute safety of a predator that has found its permanent resting place within the system that captured it. The red recording light on the camera housing blinks rhythmically in the corner of her cell, a small, artificial heartbeat that captures the final, silent baseline of a 40-volume nightmare that has finally reached its end. In the quiet corridors of the Queen and Library, where Chloe Sterling worked her final shift on that cold November night in 1998, a small, bronze memorial plaque is mounted on the wall near the history section, its surface polished by the hands of thousands of students who pass by it every single day. The inscription is brief, containing no mention of the murder, No mention of the sister and no mention of the cold case that paralyzed the city for 26 years. It reads simply, for Chloe, who loved the stories. It is the ultimate victory of the community over the malice of the killer, a deliberate choice to remember the victim for her own individual passions, her own quiet contributions, and the beautiful potential of her young life, completely separating her legacy from the monstrous deception that attempted to swallow her identity whole. The city of Seattle sleeps beneath its gray blanket of clouds, the lights of the skyscrapers reflecting off the black, silent waters of the Sound, the streets carrying the invisible, overlapping histories of millions of human lives that have passed through the Emerald Gateway over more than a century. The files are closed, the boxes are sealed, and the name Chloe Sterling has finally been moved from the registry of the missing to the roll call of the honored dead, her memory resting safely in the quiet light of the truth. The long journey through the darkness is complete, the digital net has been hauled in, and the sister who lied for 26 years sits in the absolute silence of her concrete tomb, completely forgotten by the city she terrorized, while the relentless Pacific Northwest rain begins to fall once again over the beautiful, scarred world outside her walls. The physical structure of the Aurora Avenue Bridge, officially designated as the George Washington Memorial Bridge, stands as a towering, industrial gray monument spanning the high gap between Queen and Hill and Fremont. It is a massive lattice of steel rivets and weathered concrete that, on any ordinary Pacific Northwest night, serves as a vital artery for thousands of commuters hurrying through the damp darkness. But on the night of November 12, 1998, that industrial giant became a theater of pure psychological terror for the city of Seattle. When a passing transit bus driver tapped his brakes at 10:42 p.m., his headlights illuminated a scene that looked less like a real-world occurrence and more like a staged, cinematic nightmare. There, parked precariously close to the center span of the bridge's northbound lane, was a midnight blue 1993 Honda Civic. The vehicle's engine was idling with a low, mechanical metallic rattle that vibrated against the damp air, its hazard lights flashing in rhythmic, amber synchronization, casting a strobe-like glow across the slick, rain-filmed asphalt. The response from the Seattle Police Department was immediate, but from the very first minute, the scene presented an agonizing paradox that left veteran patrol officers completely paralyzed by suspicion. The driver's side door was flung wide open, extending out into the roadway like a broken wing, as if the occupant had exited the vehicle in a state of extreme, frantic haste. When the first responding sergeant leaned his head into the interior, his flashlight beam cutting through the heavy smell of damp upholstery and cheap convenience store vanilla air freshener, he found an environment that defied the standard logic of an abduction or a violent highway carjacking. The keys were still in the ignition, dangling from a heavy plastic keychain that clanked rhythmically against the steering column. A black leather purse rested entirely undisturbed on the passenger seat, its zipper open to reveal a wallet packed with cash, credit cards, and a pristine student identification card for Chloe Sterling. On the floorboard, a portable cassette player was still humming, spinning a low, distorted grunge track that muffled the distant sound of the city's traffic below. The environment immediately outside the vehicle offered absolutely nothing to clear up the confusion, acting instead as a blank wall that absorbed every investigative effort. The relentless November fog had rolled in heavily from Puget Sound, dropping visibility down to less than 10 feet and wrapping the steel girders of the bridge in a thick, wet shroud that suppressed sound and erased physical evidence. Officers walked the perimeter with high-intensity lanterns, searching the wet asphalt for scuff marks, dropped belongings, or blood spatter, but the rain had already washed the surface clean, leaving behind only the shimmering reflection of neon streetlights. They approached the rusted iron safety railing, peering down into the yawning, black abyss where the Lake Washington Ship Canal lay over 160 feet below, its freezing, dark waters completely invisible from the deck. The initial theory was as simple as it was devastating. A popular, brilliant 18-year-old girl, with everything to live for, had simply parked her car in the middle of a highway, stepped out into the night, and leaped into the void without leaving a single note or an explanation behind. Within hours, the quiet, affluent neighborhood of Queen and was violently jolted awake by the arrival of unmarked detective vehicles and a mobile command unit that parked along the tree-lined perimeter of the Sterling family estate. The house was a pristine, brick colonial structure that projected an image of absolute stability and generational security, a home where the lawn was always manicured, where the porch lights were always bright, and where tragedies were supposed to be things read about in the morning newspapers. Inside, the family was plunged into an instant, chaotic matrix of grief and confusion that shattered their private world before the morning sun could break through the clouds. Thomas and Martha Sterling sat in their wood-paneled living room, their faces pale, their voices reduced to trembling whispers as they tried to explain to the lead detective that their daughter Chloe had no reason to end her life. She was a high school senior with an unblemished academic record. She had just received an early acceptance letter from her dream university, and she was supposed to be driving straight home from her evening shift at the community library. Sitting on the floral sofa between her devastated parents was 19-year-old Maya Sterling, her eyes wide with shock, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea that she let go cold as the hours ticked by. Maya became the primary source of information for the frantic investigators during those critical, early hours of the timeline reconstruction. She explained, with an extraordinary, detail-oriented precision that the detectives noted as remarkably helpful, exactly what Chloe had been wearing when she left the house that afternoon: a green wool sweater, dark jeans, and a distinctive silver ring etched with her initials. Maya walked the officers through Chloe's daily routine, detailing her friendships, her study habits, and her emotional state over the past few weeks, insisting with absolute certainty that there had been no signs of depression, no secret boyfriends, and no sudden behavioral shifts that could indicate a hidden trauma. She was a rock for her parents, her voice steadying whenever her mother succumbed to hysterics, stepping instantly into the role of the reliable, observant sibling who would guide the family through the unfolding nightmare. As the dawn broke over the city, the true scale of the investigative nightmare became painfully clear to the specialized missing persons unit tasked with tracking Chloe's final movements. Harbor patrol boats, equipped with advanced sonar arrays and dive teams, systematically dragged the bottom of the ship canal beneath the bridge, fighting against the powerful, shifting currents and zero-visibility conditions of the dark underwater channels. At the same time, a specialized forensic unit took possession of the abandoned Honda Civic, moving it to a climate-controlled processing bay at the precinct where technicians went over every square inch of the vehicle with alternative light sources and chemical enhancement sprays. They recovered latent fingerprints from the steering wheel and the gear shift, but they all belonged to Chloe or her mother, who frequently shared the car for grocery runs. There was no foreign DNA on the seats, no signs of defensive scuffling on the interior plastics, and no microscopic fibers that could suggest an uninvited passenger had been riding in the back. The car was a digital dead end, a physical void that held plenty of questions, but not a single traceable indicator of an outside threat. The investigation rapidly expanded its dragnet into the community, systematically interviewing every individual who had interacted with Chloe during the final 24 hours of her documented life. Detectives spent days at the Queen and Branch Library, reviewing surveillance footage from the parking lot and interviewing the staff who had worked the evening shift alongside her on November 12th. The head librarian confirmed that Chloe had checked out her final patron at precisely 9:55 p.m., packed her backpack, and walked out into the foggy parking lot alone, showing absolutely no signs of distress or nervousness. Her route from the library to the family home should have taken less than 15 minutes via a series of well-lit residential streets, a path that bypassed the Aurora Avenue Bridge entirely. The central, maddening riddle of the case became the geographical anomaly. Why did a girl who was heading home to her parents turn her vehicle onto a major commercial highway, drive several miles in the opposite direction, and stop on a bridge that she had no logical reason to cross? The boyfriend, a 19-year-old University of Washington student named Derek Vance, was immediately brought into the precinct for an intense, 3-hour interrogation that tested the limits of his emotional composure. Rumors had begun to circulate through the high school network that the couple had been experiencing tension, with some friends hinting at a secret conflict that Chloe had refused to discuss openly. Derek was subjected to a rigorous timeline analysis, his phone records were pulled, and his vehicle was searched by forensic teams looking for any evidence of a recent physical altercation. However, his alibi was absolute and verified by multiple independent sources. At the exact time Chloe's car was found idling on the bridge, Derek was sitting in a crowded lecture hall on the university campus, participating in a mandatory study group monitored by a graduate teaching assistant. He was completely devastated by the news, his confusion and grief genuine, leaving detectives with no option but to eliminate him from the suspect pool, closing off what had looked like the most promising lead in the case. With no physical evidence, no digital footprint, and no clear motive for suicide or abduction, the case began to transform from a standard criminal investigation into a toxic, long-term media sensation that consumed the city's attention. Local news vans remained permanently parked outside the Sterling residence, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky, their reporters delivering live, dimmed-out updates every evening against the backdrop of the darkened brick colonial home. Maya Sterling emerged during this period as the primary conduit between the family and the voracious press corps, displaying a natural, poised eloquence that captivated the public's imagination. She organized the first citywide candlelight vigil on the pedestrian path of the Aurora Avenue Bridge, standing before a sea of flickering flames and weeping teenagers to deliver a speech that would define the tragedy for a generation. "We are not here to say goodbye to Chloe," Maya said, her voice cutting through the sound of the traffic and the wind. "We are here to keep the light burning until the darkness gives her back to us." The public image of Maya as the heroic, tireless sister who refused to let the flame of hope die out was cemented during those initial months of total investigative VTAC. While her parents slowly withdrew from the world, their physical health deteriorating rapidly under the crushing weight of their unresolved grief, Maya became a regular fixture on local television programs, always carrying a fresh stack of missing person flyers and a photograph of Chloe's smiling face. She kept the case alive through sheer force of will, constantly pressure testing the police department for updates, writing op-eds for the Seattle Times, and establishing a nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing support resources for families of missing children. No one who watched her speak, no one who saw the tears streaming down her face as she described the agonizing pain of looking at her sister's empty bedroom every morning, could have possibly imagined that the entire performance was a masterpiece of cold, psychopathic containment. Behind the public mask, the investigative files on the Sterling disappearance were quietly moving through a series of bureaucratic handoffs as the months turned into years without a single new lead. The initial task force was dismantled, its personnel reassigned to fresh, solvable homicides, leaving the cardboard boxes of Chloe's life to be transferred to the basement archives of the precinct. The case became a legendary cold case, a file that new detectives would pull from the shelves during quiet night shifts, fascinated by the clean, cinematic perfection of the disappearance, but ultimately defeated by the total lack of raw data to work with. The case had settled into a permanent state of historical preservation, a mystery as deeply embedded in the identity of Seattle as the gray winter rain that fell over the streets, a story that everyone knew but no one believed would ever reach a real conclusion. The decades that followed the 1998 disappearance were not kind to the Sterling family, systematically erasing the older generation until only Maya remained to carry the weight of the name and the estate. Martha Sterling passed away in 2004 from a sudden, aggressive illness that her doctors openly admitted was exacerbated by the chronic, low-level stress of her unyielding grief. Thomas followed her less than 4 years later, his heart failing him in the middle of a quiet winter night inside the Queen and House. Maya handled the funerals, settled the estates, and remained in the large brick colonial home alone, converting Chloe's former bedroom into a private study where she kept the archives of the foundation she had built. She pursued a career in clinical psychology, obtaining her doctorate from the university, and establishing a successful private practice focused on helping young people navigate the aftermath of familial trauma. Her professional peers regarded her with a profound level of professional respect, viewing her as an individual who had successfully synthesized a personal catastrophe into a powerful, lifelong mission of healing and resilience. In the spring of 2024, The administrative landscape of the Seattle Police Department underwent a significant modernization with the establishment of the Advanced Forensic Analytics Division, a specialized cold case task force equipped with cutting-edge digital timeline software. The mission of this new unit was not to search for new physical clues in old evidence lockers, but to take the massive, unorganized mountains of historical paperwork and translate them into a singular, synchronized digital matrix. This software was capable of mapping out thousands of independent data points simultaneously: telephone toll records, witness statements, weather patterns, and public transportation schedules, creating a highly detailed visual model of a crime scene's temporal geography. The Sterling file, due to its high-profile status and the total absence of physical clues, was selected as one of the first historical cases to be processed through the new digital grid. The young detective assigned to the review, an analytical specialist named Marcus Thorne, spent 3 months digitizing every single page of the 40-volume archive, typing the precise timestamps from hundreds of 1998 witness statements into the system. As the computer processed the data, creating a multi-layered, interactive timeline of November 12, 1998, the software began to color-code the movements of everyone associated with Chloe Sterling during her final hours. Most of the timelines showed perfect, overlapping verification, their data nodes turning a solid, steady green that indicated complete historical consistency. But as Detective Thorne zoomed in on the specific window of time between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., the narrow hour during which Chloe left the library and her car was found abandoned on the bridge, the digital grid flagged a tiny, isolated anomaly that had been completely invisible to the original investigators using paper notebooks. The anomaly centered on the statement provided by Maya Sterling during her initial interview on the morning of November 13, 1998. At the time, she had stated that she spent the entire evening of the 12th inside the family's home on Queen and Hill, studying for a college examination until she retired to bed at approximately 10:30 p.m., unaware that her sister had failed to return home. This statement had been accepted as absolute truth by the early detectives, who had no reason to doubt the word of a distraught teenage sister whose parents were sitting right beside her. However, when Detective Thorne cross-referenced Maya's stated timeline with a newly digitized archive of automated transit logs from that exact night, the software found a structural contradiction that fractured the historical narrative. In 1998, the city of Seattle had just completed the installation of an experimental, automated toll verification system along the arterial corridors leading toward the Aurora Avenue Bridge, a primitive precursor to modern license plate recognition networks that logged the passage of vehicles using automated camera flashes. The system was highly unreliable and its records had never been fully integrated into the original murder file, sitting instead as a separate, unindexed backup tape in the city's transit archives for over a quarter of a century. When Thorne's digital matrix combed through those ancient transit logs, it discovered that a vehicle registered to Maya Sterling, a silver 1995 Ford Escort, had passed through an automated verification point 2 blocks from the northbound entrance of the Aurora Avenue Bridge at exactly 10:38 p.m. on November 12, 1998. The implications of that single data point were staggeringly complex and instant. If Maya's car was near the entrance of the bridge at 10:38 p.m., she could not have been inside her bedroom on Queen and Hill studying for an exam as she had claimed in her signed police statement. Furthermore, the timing was terrifyingly exact. Her vehicle had crossed the toll point precisely 4 minutes before Chloe's Honda Civic was spotted idling on the center span of the bridge by the transit bus driver at 10:42 p.m. The digital grid was pointing to a reality that defied 26 years of public history. The grieving sister, the public activist, the celebrated psychologist had been physically present at the scene of the disappearance, operating in the dark just moments before the vehicle was abandoned. Detective Thorne did not immediately launch a public raid or draft an aggressive arrest warrant. He knew that a 26-year-old transit log was a powerful circumstantial lead, but it was far from an ironclad piece of evidence that could withstand the scrutiny of a high-powered defense attorney. He needed to understand the context of the lie, and he needed to bring Maya into an environment where she could be confronted with the data without tipping off her professional network or triggering a defensive public relations campaign from her foundation. He utilized a standard administrative protocol, contacting Maya's office to request a private meeting at the downtown precinct under the guise of a routine, periodic cold case update, a procedure she had complied with multiple times over the decades as new technologies emerged. When Maya Sterling walked into the interview room on that bright April morning in 2024, she looked exactly like the image of professional success and quiet resilience she had projected for a lifetime. She wore a tailored wool blazer, her silver-streaked hair was cut into a sharp, elegant bob, and she carried a leather notebook containing the letterhead of her nonprofit foundation. She greeted Detective Thorne with a warm, familiar handshake, thanking him for his ongoing dedication to her sister's memory and stating how grateful she was that the department was still dedicating resources to the file. The interview room was quiet, the modern digital recording equipment mounted silently in the corners of the ceiling, its small red lights blinking like an artificial pulse as she took her seat across from the investigator. "Thank you for coming in, Dr. Sterling," Thorne said softly, his voice carrying a calm, non-threatening professional neutrality as he opened a slim folder on the table between them. "We've been running some of the old files through our new temporal mapping systems, just trying to clean up some of the historical data blocks before we submit the annual report to the State Archive. There are just a few minor timeline verifications we need to clear up regarding the movements of the immediate family on the night of November 12th. Maya smiled gently, leaning back in her chair with the absolute, unshakable composure of an individual who had spent 26 years practicing her responses in front of mirrors and television cameras. "Of course, Detective," she said, her voice smooth and measured, carrying the precise, empathetic resonance of a trained clinician. "I've gone over that night so many times in my own mind, and with so many of your predecessors. I'm happy to help you clear up whatever details you need. It's the least I can do for Chloe." Thorne slid the first digital printout across the table, a clear, high-resolution graphic mapping out the geographical layout of Seattle in 1998, with a bright red line tracking the movement of Chloe's car from the library toward the bridge. "According to the original files, you stated that you were at home the entire evening, correct? That you never left the Queen and house after your sister departed for her library shift." "That is correct," Maya responded without a fraction of a second hesitation, her eyes remaining locked onto Thorne's face with a calm, unwavering intensity. "I was in my room until quite late, preparing for a developmental psychology midterm. My parents were downstairs in the den. It was a completely ordinary, quiet evening until the morning came and everything fell apart." Thorne paused, letting the silence hang in the small room for a long moment, the quiet weight of the upcoming confrontation shifting the air pressure between them. He then reached into the folder, extracted a second sheet of paper, the automated transit log from November 12, 1998, and laid it directly over the map of the city. The bright blue highlighting on the page focused squarely on the license plate number of her old Ford Escort and the precise timestamp, 10:38 and 14 seconds p.m. "If that's the case, Dr. Sterling," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming cold, hard, and entirely devoid of the previous warmth, "can you explain to me why your personal vehicle was photographed crossing the arterial entry to the Aurora Avenue Bridge exactly 4 minutes before your sister's car was abandoned on that very span?" The effect of the question was not a sudden, dramatic outburst or a theatrical gasp. It was a total, instantaneous freezing of her physical posture that was infinitely more terrifying to watch. The gentle smile on Maya's face did not fade. It hardened, locking into a rigid, artificial mask as the muscles in her jaw tightened until the skin over her cheekbones turned a stark, bloodless white. Her eyes darted down to the paper, her pupils contracting as she read the digital text, her brain processing the terrifying reality that a silent, forgotten camera from 1998 had just crossed 26 years of time to destroy her entire life. The polished, bulletproof persona of the grieving savior had just been struck by a mortal forensic blow, and inside the quiet room, the long-buried reality of the Elm Street nightmare began to bleed out into the light. The silence inside the interrogation room stretched out for what felt like an eternity, the low, mechanical hum of the building's air filtration system filling the void between the detective and the psychologist. Maya's hands, which had been resting casually on her leather notebook, slowly tightened into rigid, pale claws, her fingernails pressing into the textured leather with enough force to cause the material to groan under the pressure. She did not look up from the automated transit log, her eyes tracking the precise black numbers of the timestamp over and over again, searching for a logical out, a technical loophole, or a geographical alibi that could save her from the precipice. But the data was clean, unyielding, and mathematically absolute. Her teenage self had made a single, catastrophic logistical error on that foggy night in 1998, and she had spent her entire adult life completely unaware that the proof of her lie was sleeping in a city transit computer. Detective Thorne did not push her, nor did he break the silence with an aggressive accusation. He understood, from years of interviewing sophisticated offenders, that the psychological weight of a long-term deception is an immense, structural pressure that collapses from the inside out once the foundation is cracked. He simply leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, keeping his eyes fixed on the pale, frozen mask of her face, waiting for the defensive walls to give way under the weight of the evidence. He could see the subtle, rhythmic pulse beating frantically in the hollow of her throat, a frantic physical indicators that contrasted sharply with her total lack of outward movement. When Maya finally spoke, her voice was no longer the smooth, melodic instrument that had comforted traumatized children and captivated television audiences. It was a low, dry rasp that sounded like dead leaves scraping across concrete. She did not lift her eyes from the paper, her gaze remaining anchored to the highlighted timestamp. "It was a mistake," she whispered, the words barely carrying enough air to be picked up by the directional microphones in the ceiling. "A technical error in your system. I was at home. I have always been at home." "Dr. Sterling," Thorne said, his voice quiet but carrying the heavy, unyielding authority of the state. "The system was verified by 3 independent transit engineers before I brought it into this room. The camera flash caught your vehicle's specific registration marks, and the internal clock was synchronized with the main atomic clock at the Naval Observatory. You were there. You drove your car to that bridge on the night your sister vanished, and you lied to this department about it for 26 years. The question isn't whether you were on that bridge, Maya. The question is what happened to Chloe in those 4 minutes." The use of her first name, stripped of her professional title and delivered with a hard, forensic certainty, seemed to act like a physical catalyst, shattering the remaining fragments of her composure. A sudden, violent tremor shook Maya's shoulders, her head dropping forward until her forehead was nearly touching the smooth laminate surface of the table. A low, guttural sound, a mixture of a sob and a choked, desperate laugh, escaped her throat, echoing off the bare walls of the room with a raw, unsettling frequency that signaled the total collapse of her psychological defenses. The sophisticated, untouchable pillar of the community was gone, leaving behind the terrified, broken shell of a woman who had run out of pavement at the end of a 26-year road. With her face still hidden in her hands, her body rocking back and forth in a slow, rhythmic cadence of complete emotional surrender, Maya opened her mouth and began to speak, the words tumbling out in a dinned-out, continuous torrent of confession that turned the cold case upside down. "There was no stranger on the bridge," she wept, her tears soaking into the leather of her notebook, her voice raw with a decades-long accumulation of hidden terror. "There was no abduction, no vehicle carjacking, no desperate leap into the canal. I drove the car there. I left the engine running. I left the door open. I left her purse on the seat. I built the whole scene, detective. I built the mystery because I needed everyone to look at the water. I needed everyone to look away from the mountains." The seasoned investigators monitoring the feed from the observation room behind the two-way mirror stood frozen, their breaths caught in their throats as they listened to the clinical detail of the disclosure. Maya explained that the violence had not originated on the concrete deck of the George Washington Memorial Bridge, but hours earlier, deep within the isolation of a remote logging forest near the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The family owned a small, seasonal hunting cabin located on a secluded tract of land 5 miles outside the small mountain community of North Bend, a place where the sisters had spent their childhood summers running through the ferns and the towering Douglas firs. On the afternoon of November 12th, 1998. A sudden, explosive confrontation had erupted between Chloe and Maya inside that secluded cabin, an argument fueled by years of simmering sibling rivalry and a devastating discovery Chloe had made just days prior. Chloe had uncovered evidence that Maya had been systematically stealing thousands of dollars from their parents' retirement accounts to fund a secret, destructive lifestyle that threatened to ruin the family's financial stability. Chloe had confronted her younger sister in the isolation of the mountains, threatening to reveal the entire fraud to their father the moment they returned to Seattle that evening, a disclosure that would have destroyed Maya's academic future and her standing in the family permanently. The confrontation escalated from screaming accusations to intense physical violence with terrifying speed, the two teenagers clawing and tearing at each other within the narrow confines of the wooden living room. In a blind, uncontrollable flash of sociopathic rage, Maya had reached out, her fingers wrapping around the handle of a heavy, cast-iron fireplace poker that rested near the hearth. She swung the implement with all her physical strength, striking Chloe squarely across the temple with a sickening, heavy impact that killed the older girl instantly, her body collapsing onto the worn braided rug before she could even utter a final cry for help. Panic, absolute and ice-cold, replaced Maya's rage as she stared down at the lifeless body of her sister, the quiet sound of the mountain whined through the trees outside the only witness to the atrocity. Her teenage mind, operating with a clinical, predatory survival instinct that would define her entire adult life, instantly pivoted from a sister to a criminal strategist. She realized that if she left the body at the cabin, the police would trace the timeline back to the mountain property within 48 hours, uncovering the bloodstains and the motive before the week was out. She needed to erase the crime. She needed to redirect the entire geographical focus of law enforcement, and she needed to create a narrative that would buy her time to build an impenetrable wall of innocence. She spent 2 hours cleaning the cabin floor with chemical detergents, stripping the blood-soaked rug from the room and bundling it into the trunk of her car alongside her sister's body. She then drove her vehicle deep into the maze of unmapped logging roads that crisscrossed the surrounding national forest, stopping at an isolated, overgrown clearing beneath a canopy of ancient cedar trees. Working under the pale light of a flashlight held between her teeth, she used a rusted trenching shovel to dig a shallow, muddy grave in the soft forest floor, burying Chloe Sterling beneath a heavy layer of ferns, wet soil, and rotting wood, leaving her to be systematically consumed by the unforgiving Pacific Northwest earth. But burying the body was only half of the logistical problem. She still had to account for Chloe's vehicle, which was sitting in the library parking lot back in Queen, and where Chloe had left it before their prearranged meeting at the mountain cabin. Maya drove her own Ford Escort back into the city, parked it several blocks away from the library, and walked through the dark to Chloe's Honda Civic. She stepped into her dead sister's driver's seat, turned the key in the ignition, and drove the vehicle directly toward the highest, most public span of the Aurora Avenue Bridge, a location she knew was historically associated with sudden, untraceable disappearances and tragic endings. She staged the scene with the cold, meticulous precision of a theatrical director, ensuring that every detail would guide the police toward a singular, false conclusion. She left the headlights cutting through the fog, left the hazard lights flashing their amber warning, left the purse untouched on the seat, and left the cassette tape humming its low melody, creating a perfect, haunting tableau of sudden erasure. She then flung the driver's side door wide open to suggest a sudden, forced exit, stepped over the iron safety railing, and walked calmly back through the foggy night toward her own vehicle, which she had positioned near the bridge entry, the exact movement that had been captured by the automated transit camera at 10:38 p.m. She returned home, slipped into her bedroom, and spent the night waiting for the morning phone call that would change her world forever, entirely prepared to step into the role of the devastated, innocent sibling she would perfect over the next 26 years. The cold case was no longer an unsolved mystery. It was a masterclass in domestic camouflage, a chilling demonstration of a killer who had used the public's collective empathy as an impenetrable shield against suspicion, living her life in the bright light of admiration while her victims slept in the dark of the mountain mud. The echoes of Maya Sterling's whispered words inside the downtown interrogation room did not dissipate into the sterile air of the precinct. They seemed to condense against the glass, forming a visible boundary between the public history of the city and the dark, hidden geography of the Cascade foothills. To witness the unraveling of a 26-year-old masterpiece of social deception was to watch a physical structure collapse under the unyielding weight of tectonic movement. The seasoned investigators who had spent decades chasing phantoms on the Aurora Avenue Bridge were forced to instantly dismantle their entire understanding of the tragedy, shifting their focus from the rain-slicked steel arches of the city to a remote, overgrown logging trail 60 miles to the east. The confession had provided the legal system with a name and a narrative, but it had also unleashed a profound, destabilizing horror. The realization that for nearly 3 decades, the primary source of comfort for a grieving community had been the very individual who had engineered its torment. The administrative response from the King County Prosecutor's Office and the state police was executed with a quiet, militaristic urgency that bypassed the standard bureaucratic channels to prevent a catastrophic leak to the media before the physical evidence could be secured. Detective Marcus Thorne, armed with the handwritten coordinates and maps drawn by Maya during the final hours of her breakdown, organized a highly specialized retrieval convoy that departed from the downtown headquarters under the cover of the pre-dawn darkness. The team consisted of senior forensic anthropologists, ground-penetrating radar technicians, search and rescue recovery specialists, and a select detail of state troopers whose primary objective was to secure the perimeter of the logging road before the dawn could bring the first wave of news helicopters and true crime bloggers. The journey from the urban density of Seattle to the rugged wilderness of King County was a transition through layers of time and memory, the modern highway system eventually narrowing into a series of cracked, asphalt logging roads that twisted through the dense canopy of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. The air here was different, cold, thick with the smell of wet cedar, rotting pine needles, and the heavy, mineral scent of damp clay that characterized the Pacific Northwest mountain landscape. This was the environment that Maya had selected in 1998 to be the permanent vault for her crime, a location so vast, so chaotic in its natural growth, that without her direct confession, the remains of Chloe Sterling would have remained buried beneath the floor of the forest until the end of time. The convoy arrived at the entrance of the abandoned logging trail, designated on historical forestry maps as Spur Road 412, at precisely 5:45 a.m., the sky to the east still a dark, bruised charcoal gray that offered no natural light. The technicians deployed a series of mobile, high-intensity halogen floodlights, their brilliant white beams cutting through the mountain mist and casting long, skeletal shadows against the towering old-growth Douglas firs that stood like sentinels around the clearing. The physical coordinates provided by Maya led the recovery team down a steep, muddy incline toward a natural depression in the earth, located beneath the decaying remains of a massive cedar tree that had fallen during a winter storm in the early 90s. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Avery Cole, knelt in the thick, black mud, her movements deliberate and respectful as she began the meticulous process of setting up a standard archaeological grid over the suspected burial site. Every square inch of the surface had to be mapped, photographed, and documented before a single shovel of earth could be disturbed, ensuring that the spatial context of the remains was preserved with the highest degree of scientific accuracy. The soil here was highly acidic, a chemical reality that Thorne knew would have had a devastating effect on any biological tissue over 26 years, potentially leaving behind only the most durable skeletal structures and synthetic materials to verify the confession. The first pass with a ground-penetrating radar array revealed a distinct, irregular anomaly located approximately 3 feet beneath the surface matrix of roots and topsoil, a disruption in the natural layering of the clay that indicated a historical excavation consistent with a hastily dug trench. The technicians marked the perimeter with bright neon orange flags, their small plastic bodies fluttering in the cold mountain wind as the diggers stepped forward with small, handheld trowels and wooden brushes, abandoning heavy tools to avoid scratching or fracturing any fragile bone material sleeping in the dark below. As the top layers of decomposing organic matter and tangled fern roots were carefully lifted from the grid, the physical reality of the 1998 night began to emerge from the earth with a heartbreaking, visceral clarity. At 7:12 a.m., the tip of Dr. Cole's brush exposed a patch of dark, synthetic fabric that had resisted the corrosive action of the acidic soil, the remains of the heavy nylon backpack that Chloe had carried out of the Queen and Library on the final night of her life. Inside the decayed zipper compartment, preserved in a pocket of anaerobic clay, were her high school textbooks, her notebooks filled with neat, cursive handwriting, and a water-damaged copy of a novel she had been reading for her advanced placement English literature seminar. Beneath the backpack, embedded in the deep matrix of the clay, the team uncovered the skeletal remains of Chloe Sterling, her form arranged in a cramped, unnatural posture that proved the extreme haste and panic of the burial process. The bones were stained a dark, mahogany brown by the tannins in the cedar roots, several of which had woven themselves through her rib cage over the decades, binding her body to the very life cycle of the forest. Despite the profound skeletal degradation, the skull remained remarkably intact, the right temporal bone displaying a massive, radiating fracture that perfectly matched the dimensions and the blunt force impact capacity of the cast-iron fireplace poker described in Maya's confession. The most poignant and undeniable piece of identification came from the third digit of the left hand, where a small, circular band of metal remained wrapped around the bone, its surface coated in a thick layer of oxidized green patina. Dr. Cole used a soft saline solution to gently clear away the mud, revealing the bright, unyielding silver of the high school graduation ring that Thomas and Martha Sterling had presented to their eldest daughter just months before her life was stolen. The initials CES were still perfectly legible, etched into the inner band of the silver by a local jeweler who had passed away decades prior, a permanent, material testament that survived the erasure of the family and the passage of 26 long winters. The recovery process lasted for nearly 12 hours, every bone fragment, every fiber of clothing, and every ounce of surrounding soil carefully cataloged and placed into sterile, white transport containers destined for the King County Medical Examiner's laboratory in Seattle. As the convoy prepared to leave the mountain site, the sun finally broke through the heavy cloud layer, casting a sharp, golden light across the empty trench, which now looked like nothing more than an ordinary scar on the forest floor. The geographical attack that had paralyzed the city's law enforcement network for a generation had been broken, not by luck, but by the cold, digital mathematics of a time-stamped transit camera that left the killer with nowhere left to run. While the forensic units were completing their grim task in the mountains, the psychological fallout of Maya Sterling's arrest was tearing through the social and professional institutions of Seattle like a physical shockwave. The nonprofit foundation she had established, the Chloe Light Foundation, became an instant crime scene of a different nature, its offices in the downtown financial district swarmed by white-collar fraud investigators and detectives from the Major Crimes Squad. The corporate records, the donation logs, and the administrative emails were seized under emergency warrants, revealing a secondary layer of financial depravity that added a sickening dimension to the historical murder. The audit revealed that Maya had used the foundation not just as a tool for public relations and social camouflage, but as a sophisticated, long-term money laundering apparatus to fund a lavish, private existence that was entirely hidden from her professional peers. She had systematically diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars in charitable donations, money given in good faith by citizens who wanted to support the families of missing children, into a network of offshore accounts and shell companies that paid for her luxury real estate investments and private travels. The foundation that bore the name of her victim was revealed to be a parasite, an enterprise built on the commodification of her own sister's murder, a display of clinical narcissism so profound that it defied the comprehension of the psychologists who had worked alongside her for years. The academic community at the university, where Maya had served as an adjunct professor and a frequent guest lecturer on the dynamics of family trauma, was plunged into a period of intense institutional humiliation and professional self-examination. The departments she had influenced were forced to launch an immediate, comprehensive review of every clinical assessment she had ever authored, every student thesis she had supervised, and every child custody recommendation she had submitted to the family courts of King County. Her professional colleagues realized, with a deep sense of horror, that they had allowed an active, unremorseful killer to operate as an authority on human empathy, using her understanding of psychological defense mechanisms to perfect her own mask of sanity. The brick colonial home on Queen and Hill, the structure that had stood as a monument to the family's stability before becoming a house of ghosts, was surrounded by a heavy police perimeter as forensic technicians conducted a secondary search of the interior. Armed with high-intensity chemical enhancement sprays and alternative light sources, they moved through the living room, the bedrooms, and the basement, looking for any hidden trophies, secondary records, or evidence of the 1998 fraud that had triggered the fatal confrontation. Although the house had been meticulously cleaned and maintained by Maya over 26 years, the deep structure of the property still held the invisible markers of its history. In the basement storage room, hidden behind a false panel in the cedar shelving, detectives discovered a weathered, leather-bound diary that had belonged to Chloe during her senior year of high school. The final entries, dated in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, provided a devastating voice from the past that validated every detail of Maya's confession. Chloe had written extensively about her growing terror of her younger sister, documenting the discovery of the forged checks, the systematic theft from their parents' accounts, and the cold, unblinking hostility Maya displayed whenever she was confronted with the truth. "Maya looks at me sometimes like I'm an obstacle, not a sister," Chloe had written in her final entry, dated November 10, 1998. "I'm going to tell Dad everything when we go to the cabin this weekend. I can't let her ruin this family." The discovery of the diary provided the prosecution with something infinitely more valuable than just a motive. It provided an internal timeline of premeditation that shattered the defense's initial strategy of portraying the murder as a sudden, uncontrolled act of passion or self-defense. The text proved that Maya had entered that mountain cabin with a clear, calculated understanding of the threat Chloe posed to her survival, creating a narrative of intent that elevated the charges from simple manslaughter to first-degree aggravated capital murder. The voice of the victim had been preserved in her own handwriting, sleeping in the dark of her family's home, waiting for 26 years for someone to find the key to her vault. The legal arraignment of Maya Sterling, held at the King County Courthouse on a cold, rain-slicked Tuesday morning, became the most highly sought-after public ticket in the modern history of the Pacific Northwest judicial system. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity hours before the doors opened, crowded with childhood friends of the sisters, former detectives who had worked the 1998 file, and ordinary citizens who wanted to look at the face of the woman who had manipulated their collective grief for an entire adult life. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was a tense, claustrophobic pressure cooker of raw emotion, the quiet chatter of the onlookers dropping into a dead, absolute silence as the heavy oak side doors clicked open and the bailiff announced the entry of the defendant. Maya Sterling stepped into the room wearing a standard-issue orange cotton jumpsuit, her wrists secured to a heavy chain wrapped around her waist, her ankles shackled in steel irons that clanked loudly against the polished linoleum floor with every step. The elegant, sophisticated persona she had projected during her career had vanished entirely, stripped away by the bureaucratic reality of the jail intake system. Her silver-streaked hair was unwashed, hanging loosely around her pale face, and her eyes were fixed firmly on the defense table in front of her, refusing to look at the gallery or the bank of media cameras that tracked her every movement. The reading of the formal charges by the state district judge was a cold, clinical recitation of horror that cut through the silence of the room like a physical blade. The state laid out the indictment: 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder, 1 count of tampering with physical evidence, 1 count of grand larceny, and 12 counts of white-collar financial fraud associated with the operations of her charitable foundation. As the judge read through the details of the skull fracture, the shallow grave in the mountains, and the staging of the vehicle on the Aurora Avenue Bridge, several individuals in the front row of the gallery broke out into audible weeping, their minds unable to reconcile the violence with the woman they had championed for 26 years. When asked for her plea, Maya did not look up, her voice a low, mechanical monotone that carried no emotional inflection whatsoever as she spoke 2 words into the defense microphone: "Not guilty." It was a standard legal formality, a defensive maneuver designed to allow her high-powered legal team time to review the massive mountain of digital and forensic evidence accumulated by Detective Thorne, but it felt to the onlookers like a final, unrepentant act of defiance. The mask had been ripped away, but the cold, calculating intelligence that lay behind it remained entirely intact, prepared to fight a long war of attrition within the judicial system to avoid a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse steps, as the rain continued to fall over the gray streets of Seattle, Detective Marcus Thorne stood beneath a black umbrella, watching the news vans pack up their equipment and the crowd slowly disperse into the damp morning traffic. He felt no sense of victory, no triumphant satisfaction at having solved one of the city's most legendary cold cases. He felt only a deep, permanent sense of weariness that had settled into his bones since the afternoon of the confession. He realized that the tools he had used, the digital matrix software, the automated transit logs, had solved the mechanics of a crime, but they had left behind a void that no judicial verdict could ever fill. The story of Chloe Sterling was no longer a mystery, a puzzle to be solved by clever detectives or a ghost story whispered by teenagers on foggy nights. It was a settled historical record of absolute betrayal, a monument to the capacity of human deception to thrive in the brightest lights of public approval. The Aurora Avenue Bridge still stood, its gray steel lanes crowded with the daily rhythm of a city that was moving rapidly into the future, its commuters entirely focused on their own survival, leaving the fog and the ghosts of 1998 behind them in the dark. But for those who knew the truth, for those who had looked behind the mask of the savior and found the eyes of the monster, the city's reign would always carry the cold, lingering echo of a family destroyed from the inside out, a permanent reminder that the ultimate evil does not hide in the shadows outside. It sits comfortably at our tables, wearing the smile of a sister who promises she will never stop looking for you. The physical transformation of a human life into an administrative record of violence took place inside the post-mortem examination suite of the Kim County Medical Examiner's Office, located within the secure rear wing of Harborview Medical Center. The room was designed with clinical utility in mind. Walls covered in industrial glazed ceramic tile, stainless steel workstations equipped with downdraft ventilation systems to control environmental odors, and high-intensity overhead lighting that eliminated any shadows. This was the cold destination for the skeletal remains that had traveled 60 miles from the damp mountain clay of Spur Road 412. To the forensic team assembled around the central examination table, the contents of the white, secure transport containers did not represent the public tragedy of the Sterling family, nor did they carry the emotional weight of a 26-year-old mystery. The collection of darkened, stained bone structures was officially logged under the scientific designation case number 1998, CS 1112, the physical ledger of Chloe Sterling's final minutes on Earth. Detective Marcus Thorne stood in the observation alcove behind the thick triple-paned security glass, his notepad resting flat against the metal counter, his eyes fixed on the assembly process unfolding on the table. The lead forensic anthropologist, Dr. Avery Cole, along with the chief medical examiner, worked with extreme, quiet deliberation, utilizing anatomical